The piercing wail of evacuation sirens shattered the morning calm as armed Capitol Police officers burst through marble corridors, their boots echoing against the historic walls. "Move everyone out now." The command reverberated through the Senate chamber, where lawmakers sat frozen in their seats, coffee cups halfway to their lips, briefing papers scattered across mahogany desks, like autumn leaves in a sudden storm. Senator Marcus Jordan felt his blood turn to ice as he watched his colleagues being herded toward emergency exits, under the watchful eyes of officers with their hands hovering over their weapons. The morning had started like any other, with Marcus arriving early to review his education reform bill one final time before the afternoon vote. Now, chaos reigned supreme as evacuation protocols activated with military precision. "Sir, you need to come with us immediately." The officer's voice carried an edge that brooked no argument. Marcus rose slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. A gas leak, fire alarm. Then he noticed how the officer's eyes lingered on him, how their formation subtly boxed him in, rather than guided him out. The truth hit him like a physical blow when Special Agent Sarah Chen of the FBI appeared at his side. "Senator Jordan, we need to discuss some serious allegations that have been made against you." Her professional demeanor couldn't mask the gravity in her voice. Around them, senators and staff members streamed past in organized panic, their faces pale with confusion and fear. "What allegations?" Marcus managed to keep his voice steady, despite the thundering of his heart. "A credible source has reported that you're planning a bombing attack on this building during today's vote." Agent Chen's words fell like hammer blows. "We're evacuating the Capitol as a precautionary measure." The accusation was so absurd, so monumentally offensive, that Marcus almost laughed. Almost. But the grim faces surrounding him, the weight of history pressing down from the dome above, and the knowledge of how quickly public opinion could turn against a black senator, accused of terrorism, kept the laughter locked in his throat. 3 hours earlier, Karen Whitmore had sat in her pristine suburban kitchen, manicured fingers wrapped around a cup of Earl Grey tea that had long since grown cold. The morning news droned in the background, but her attention was fixed entirely on her encrypted phone. The text message was simple: "Payment confirmed. Proceed as discussed." Karen had built her career as a political operative on her ability to remain calm under pressure, to execute plans with surgical precision. 20 years in Washington had taught her that perception was reality, that the right accusation at the right moment could topple governments and reshape nations. Today, she would put those lessons to their ultimate test. The education bill Senator Jordan was pushing would devastate the private prison industry, slash corporate tax loopholes, and fund public schools with money that currently flowed to her employer's offshore accounts. $40 million in quarterly profits hung in the balance. Karen's fee for stopping the vote was modest, by comparison just $2 million, and a guarantee of protection from prosecution. She dialed 911 with steady hands, her voice trembling with precisely calibrated panic, when the dispatcher answered, "Please, you have to help me. I work in Senator Marcus Jordan's office, and I overheard him planning something terrible." The lie rolled off her tongue like honey, sweetened by years of practice. "Ma'am, please try to stay calm. What exactly did you hear?" "He's planning to bomb the Capitol building during today's education vote. I heard him talking to someone about explosives, about how the vote would never happen if the building was evacuated." Karen allowed her voice to break slightly, a master class in manufactured emotion. "I'm so scared. What if he finds out I called?" Within minutes, The wheels of the federal security apparatus began turning. The 911 call was escalated to the FBI, who immediately contacted Capitol Police, who activated emergency protocols that had been refined and rehearsed since September 11th. The system worked exactly as designed, responding to credible threats with overwhelming force and absolute seriousness. Back in the Capitol, Marcus found himself in a secure interview room, the kind of sterile space where careers died and reputations were buried. Agent Chen sat across from him, a digital recorder between them, like a tiny electronic judge. "Senator, we're going to need you to account for your whereabouts this morning and explain your relationship with the caller." "I don't know what caller you're referring to." Marcus kept his hands flat on the table, a trick his father had taught him during their talks about surviving encounters with law enforcement. "I've been here since 7:30, working on my education bill with my chief of staff, Rebecca Martinez." "The caller claims to work in your office. She provided specific details about your alleged plans." Agent Chen slid a transcript across the table. Reading it, Marcus felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole into a world where logic had been suspended and madness reigned supreme. "This is complete fantasy. I've never had a conversation like this with anyone. Ever." His voice rose slightly before he caught himself. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when the stakes were this high. "May I call my attorney?" Outside the interview room, the Capitol had transformed into a fortress under siege. K-9 units swept through every office, conference room, and storage closet, their highly trained noses searching for traces of explosives. The bomb squad methodically examined suspicious packages, briefcases, and even coffee makers that might conceal deadly devices. The financial markets reacted with predictable panic to news that the Capitol had been evacuated due to a bomb threat. The Dow Jones plummeted 300 points in the first hour as investors fled to safe havens. Cable news networks switched to wall-to-wall coverage, their anchors breathlessly speculating about the identity of the would-be bomber and the implications for American democracy. Rebecca Martinez paced the marble hallway outside Marcus's sealed office, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of frustration and fear. She had worked with the senator for 8 years, had seen him fight for education reform with the passion of someone who understood poverty's grip on young minds. The idea that he would resort to violence was not just wrong, it was psychologically impossible. "Ms. Martinez." A young FBI agent approached with the kind of serious expression that meant trouble. "We'll need to search the senator's office and examine all documents related to today's vote." "Of course. I'll provide full cooperation." Rebecca's mind raced through the contents of Marcus's office policy briefs, constituent letters, family photos, and stacks of research on educational inequality. Nothing remotely connected to explosives or violence. "May I ask what specific evidence you're looking for?" The agent's expression remained professionally neutral. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of an ongoing investigation." As the search began, Marcus sat in federal custody, watching his life's work crumble in real time. The education bill represented 5 years of careful coalition building, compromise, and late-night negotiations. It would fund after-school programs in inner cities, provide free college tuition for families earning less than $50,000 annually, and create a pathway out of poverty for millions of children who looked like him. "Senator, we're going to need you to provide fingerprints and a DNA sample." Agent Chen's request sounded routine, but Marcus understood its implications. Once his genetic material was in federal databases, it would remain there forever, a permanent marker of suspicion that would follow him regardless of today's outcome. I want to speak with my attorney before providing any biological samples. Marcus had learned enough about criminal procedure during his law school days to know that cooperation had limits. Some rights, once surrendered, could never be reclaimed. The interrogation stretched into its third hour when Agent Chen received an urgent text message. Her expression shifted subtly. Confusion, replacing confidence. Senator, I need to step out for a moment. Please remain seated. In the hallway, Agent Chen joined a huddle of investigators whose body language suggested unexpected developments. What do the dogs have? She asked the K9 handler, a grizzled veteran whose German Shepherd had been trained to detect even trace amounts of explosive materials. That's just it. They found nothing. No explosives, no residue, no chemical signatures anywhere in the building. The handler's confusion was evident. But they did alert on some cardboard boxes in a supply closet on the third floor. Not explosives, just unusual scent patterns. The boxes contained campaign materials from Marcus's last election buttons, flyers, and voter registration forms. Standard political paraphernalia that posed no threat to anyone. But when forensics dusted them for fingerprints, they discovered something unexpected. Clear prints that didn't belong to Marcus or anyone on his staff. Run these through AFIS. Agent Chen instructed the forensics technician. Priority 1. The automated fingerprint identification system would compare the unknown prints against federal databases containing millions of records. If their mysterious caller had ever applied for a security clearance, been arrested, or held a government position, they would have a match within hours. Karen Whitmore felt the first stirrings of unease as she watched news coverage of the Capitol evacuation from her living room. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned. Marcus Jordan was in custody. The vote had been suspended, and financial markets were in freefall. But something in the FBI spokesman's demeanor suggested complications she hadn't anticipated. Her encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message. Situation developing. Maintain radio silence until further notice. The text came from her primary contact at Meridian Industries, the private prison conglomerate that had orchestrated this entire operation. Karen deleted the message immediately, but a growing sense of dread settled in her stomach like a lead weight. The fingerprint results arrived 4 hours after the initial evacuation order. Agent Chen stared at the computer screen in disbelief, reading the information twice to ensure she hadn't made an error. The prints belonged to Karen Elizabeth Whitmore, age 43, former CIA analyst turned private consultant. Her security clearance had been revoked 5 years earlier, following allegations of financial impropriety, but her prints remained in the system. She made the call, Agent Chen announced to her team. Karen Whitmore is our anonymous tipster, and her fingerprints are all over campaign materials in Senator Jordan's office. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. A false terrorism report against a sitting senator was sedition, punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison. Within 30 minutes, FBI agents were knocking on Karen's front door with an arrest warrant and a search warrant that would turn her perfectly curated life inside out. They found detailed files on Senator Jordan, copies of his education bill annotated with strategic objections, and most damaging of all, banking records showing a $2 million payment from a shell company controlled by Meridian Industries. Karen's hands trembled as she was read her Miranda rights in front of her carefully maintained rose garden. The neighbors who had always admired her success, her immaculate home, and her connections to powerful people now watched from behind curtains as she was led away in handcuffs. 20 years of building influence and reputation crumbled in 20 minutes of federal efficiency. "Why did you do it?" Agent Chen asked during the ride to the federal courthouse. It was an unprofessional question, driven more by curiosity than investigative necessity. But she had to know what motivated someone to make such a destructive false accusation. Karen stared out the window at the Washington skyline. Monuments to democracy and justice rising like accusations against the gray sky. "You wouldn't understand. It's all about the money. It's always about the money." Back at the Capitol, Marcus was released from custody with apologies that felt hollow after hours of interrogation and character assassination. The building was declared safe, and senators slowly returned to their offices. But the damage to his reputation had already begun metastasizing across social media and cable news. Senator Jordan was falsely accused, Agent Chen announced at an impromptu press conference. "We have arrested the individual responsible for making fraudulent terrorism reports. The senator is not a suspect in any ongoing investigation." Her words were professionally delivered, but couldn't undo hours of speculation and innuendo that had painted him as a potential domestic terrorist. Rebecca Martinez found Marcus in his office, slumped in the chair behind his desk, staring at the computer screen displaying real-time news coverage. The headlines were brutal. "Senator Jordan cleared after terror scare." "False bomb threat rocks Capitol." "Education vote postponed after security breach." "The vote is still scheduled for tomorrow," she said gently. "Leadership wants to proceed as planned." Marcus looked up with eyes that had aged years in a single afternoon. "How many colleagues do you think will vote for an education bill sponsored by someone who was questioned for terrorism? How many will want their names associated with mine on legislation that's now been tainted by all of this?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Both of them knew that political perception often mattered more than truth, that even false accusations could destroy careers and derail legislation that might help millions of children escape poverty through education. That evening, as Karen sat in a federal holding cell awaiting arraignment, FBI investigators were unraveling the conspiracy that reached far beyond one woman's false phone call. Bank records, encrypted communications, and financial transactions painted a picture of corporate influence that shocked even seasoned federal prosecutors. Meridian Industries had funneled money through a network of shell companies to pay Karen for stopping the education bill. The legislation would have redirected funding from private prisons to public schools, costing the company millions in quarterly profits. Rather than fight the bill through legitimate lobbying, they had chosen the path of sedition and false terrorism accusations. The investigation expanded rapidly as federal agents followed the money trail through offshore accounts and front companies. What they discovered was a web of corruption that implicated dozens of corporate executives, lobbyists, and political operatives in a conspiracy to subvert democratic processes through manufactured crises and false flag operations. News of the broader conspiracy broke 3 days before the rescheduled vote on Marcus's education bill. Congressional hearings were announced. Criminal charges were filed against Meridian Industries executives, and public opinion began shifting dramatically in favor of the senator who had been falsely accused of terrorism by corporate interests. The morning of the vote dawned clear and cold, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the Senate chamber. Marcus stood at his desk, looking out at colleagues who had spent days grappling with the revelation that one of their own had been targeted by a sophisticated disinformation campaign funded by corporate money. The chair recognizes Senator Jordan from Illinois. The majority leader's voice carried a weight of ceremony that acknowledged what this moment represented, not just a vote on education policy, but a test of whether American democracy could overcome the poison of corporate manipulation and manufactured fear. Marcus rose slowly, feeling the weight of history in the chamber where giants like Daniel Webster and John McCain had once stood. He looked across the aisle at Republican senators who had privately expressed outrage at how he had been treated, at Democrats who had rallied to support his bill with newfound urgency, and at the gallery where Rebecca Martinez watched with tears in her eyes. Mr. President, colleagues, 3 days ago I sat in a federal interview room, accused of planning to bomb this sacred building. His voice carried across the chamber with the authority of someone who had looked into the abyss and returned with truth. That false accusation was designed to stop us from voting on legislation that would provide opportunity and hope to millions of American children. The chamber was absolutely silent. Every senator focused entirely on Marcus's words. In the press gallery, reporters leaned forward, understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would define this generation's approach to corporate influence in politics. Corporate interests spent $2 million trying to convince America that I was a terrorist. They disrupted the people's business, caused financial market panic, and undermined faith in our democratic institutions, all to protect profits built on the backs of incarcerated Americans and underfunded schools. Marcus paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the chamber like morning mist over a battlefield. But they failed. Truth has emerged. Justice is being served. And today, we will pass the Education Opportunity Act, not despite their efforts to stop us, but because their desperate actions have revealed the urgent need for this legislation. The vote was called, and one by one, senators cast their ballots. Republicans who had initially opposed the bill now voted in favor, their support motivated by outrage at corporate interference in democratic processes. Democrats who had been lukewarm became enthusiastic advocates, understanding that this vote represented more than education policy. It was a statement about the integrity of American governance. The Education Opportunity Act passes by a vote of 97-3, the presiding officer announced. The chamber erupted in sustained applause that echoed off marble walls and bronze monuments to American democracy. Marcus stood at his desk, overwhelmed by the realization that the conspiracy designed to destroy him had ultimately ensured his bill's passage. In her federal holding cell, Karen Whitmore watched the vote on a small television, understanding that her actions had backfired spectacularly. Instead of stopping Marcus Jordan's education bill, she had guaranteed its passage with overwhelming bipartisan support. The irony was almost too bitter to contemplate. Her sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month, where she would face federal charges of making false terrorism reports, sedition, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. Federal prosecutors were seeking 20 years in prison, and her cooperation in the broader investigation of Meridian Industries was her only hope for a reduced sentence. The Meridian Industries executives faced even more serious charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, and violations of federal election law. Their corporate empire, built on private prison profits and political manipulation, crumbled as investors fled and government contracts were canceled. The company that had seemed untouchable just weeks earlier now faced bankruptcy and criminal prosecution. Marcus returned to his office after the vote to find it filled with colleagues, staff members, and reporters who wanted to witness this moment of triumph over adversity. Rebecca Martinez handed him a copy of the Education Opportunity Act, now bearing the official seal and signatures that would transform it from legislative proposal to federal law. "How does it feel, Senator?" a reporter asked. 24 hours ago, You were accused of terrorism. Today, you've passed the most significant education reform in a generation. Marcus considered the question carefully, understanding that his answer would be quoted and analyzed for years to come. It feels like democracy worked exactly as it was designed to work. Truth emerged, justice was served, and the American people's business moved forward despite attempts to derail it through lies and manipulation. The signing ceremony took place in the Rose Garden on a crisp October morning, with President Martinez wielding the pen that would make Marcus's education bill the law of the land. Surrounding them were the teachers, students, and parents who would benefit from expanded access to educational opportunities and the resources to pursue their dreams. As the president signed the legislation, Marcus thought about the children in Chicago's South Side who would now have access to after-school programs, the teenagers in rural Mississippi who could attend college without crushing debt, and the millions of young Americans who would benefit from the events that began with a false terrorism accusation in a suburban kitchen. The congressional hearings on corporate influence in democratic processes began the following week, with Marcus serving as the lead witness in an investigation that would reshape lobbying laws and corporate accountability. His testimony, delivered in the same chamber where he had been falsely accused, became a defining moment in American political history. Democracy is not a spectator sport, he told the packed hearing room, cameras broadcasting his words to a nation still grappling with the revelation that corporate interests had been willing to weaponize terrorism accusations to protect their profits. It requires active participation, vigilant oversight, and the courage to confront those who would corrupt our democratic institutions for personal gain. The legislative reforms that emerged from the hearings included stricter disclosure requirements for corporate political spending, enhanced penalties for false terrorism reports, and new oversight mechanisms for federal law enforcement agencies. The changes were dubbed the Jordan Reforms, in honor of the senator who had survived a corporate conspiracy to emerge as democracy's champion. Karen Whitmore was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after cooperating fully with investigators. Her testimony helped prosecutors secure convictions against 12 Meridian Industries executives and led to the largest corporate criminal fine in American history. The woman who had once wielded influence behind the scenes now found herself serving as a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying democratic principles for money. The first students to benefit from the Education Opportunity Act began receiving scholarships and entering after-school programs 6 months after the bill's passage. Marcus made it a point to visit these programs regularly, understanding that his legislation's true measure would not be found in political victories, but in the lives transformed by educational opportunity. During one such visit to a community center in Detroit, Marcus met Destiny Williams, a 16-year-old whose dreams of becoming a doctor had been enabled by the bill's college scholarship provisions. "Senator, I just wanted to thank you for fighting for us," she said, her words carrying the hope of a generation that had previously been forgotten by American politics. "Thank you for reminding me why we fight these battles," Marcus replied, understanding that this moment, standing in a community center, surrounded by young people whose futures had been brightened by legislation, born from false accusations and corporate corruption, represented the true victory over those who had tried to destroy him. As the sun set over Washington that evening, Marcus stood on the Capitol steps, looking out at the city, where he had been falsely accused of terrorism, cleared by federal investigation, and ultimately vindicated by democratic processes that had proven stronger than corporate manipulation. The dome above him gleamed in the twilight, a monument to the resilience of American democracy and the power of truth to triumph over lies. The story of Senator Marcus Jordan's false accusation and ultimate vindication became required reading in civics classes across America, a powerful reminder that democratic institutions, while imperfect, possess the capacity for self-correction when citizens remain vigilant and committed to truth. In the end, the conspiracy that was meant to destroy him had only made him stronger and made democracy more resilient for future generations.